Hello everybody. I think we're just about ready to begin. Really delighted to restart these seminars again. It's been a bit of a break, I know, but we're back in force. We've got Emma de Saram, a history graduate from the university, but more importantly now, Vice President for Liberation and Equality, and the newly elected Guild President. So without further ado, Emma, if you'd like to begin.
Thank you so much. Can I shut the door? Thank you for having me as part of your GSI seminar. It's a real honour to talk to you today. The topic for my seminar today is about positive tipping points. This is a topic that I've just been really interested in since the Tipping Points conference a few months ago, and I've kind of wanted to look at the tipping points model and how that applies to student activism, because I think, like, you know, climate activism in general it seems like separate from like academia and everything, especially at the University of Exeter with, like, you know, we've got such amazing climate scientists, but student activism is like just as important and as like prestigious as that. So I'm really interested in kind of like using this model and applying it to activism that I've been part of, and that a lot of students have been part of at Exeter. So obviously students and young people are at the forefront of fighting for climate justice, and we're the ones who are going to be disproportionately impacted in the long run, and student activism and climate activism has the potential for so much change. At the University of Exeter, activism is a way that people are able to express how they're feeling about university's decisions and making changes. But what I want to answer today is kind of how the tipping points model and the positive tipping points model can be potentially used and considered to make really systemic change at this university. So what I'm going to cover is my campaigning journey, the idea of positive social tipping points, and a case study, which is the £2 meal campaign. But first off, I want you to take a moment to think about what is making you hopeful in the climate crisis. I might ask you to share if you feel happy to, but just, yeah, have a think, like, what is making you hopeful, because hope and joy is something that motivates me like every single morning, even though a lot of us are like scared about the future and scared about the present. Hope is something that continues to like empower me. So yeah, just have a think for a moment. And I'll let you...
Can I just ask a technical question? Is anyone letting people into the waiting room?
Yes,
I hear you are.
Yes, yeah. Does anyone want to share what's making them hopeful? Yes.
I think since joining Extinction Rebellion last May, I've been super hopeful, just finding like-minded people, and I think as a group and like acting collectively, I think we can bring about positive change. And I think there is so much hope in that within a movement, and also just getting involved in like campaigns within the uni. I think you know, you mentioned the £2 meal campaign. That's fantastic, and it's been great to be a part of that. So yeah, that gives me a lot of hope.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. Anyone else? Yeah.
Yeah, I completely agree with what you said, bringing people together, and also bringing, maybe it can bring the best out of each and every one of us.
Yeah, cool. Thank you. So first off, brace yourself for the last, like a snapshot of like the last 4 years of my campaigning journey. So I was originally asked for this seminar just to know about like my activism, and I didn't want to talk about myself the whole time. So that's going to be shoved into like a few slides before I talk about. So there's some photos here that I don't think I've shared with like many people, but to like put into perspective like how I kind of got into climate activism, I don't think it's something I chose, it just kind of happened. But it actually started out, I had a lot of like mental health struggles. Like growing up, I had anorexia from the age of like 16 to 19, and that first picture was me being like discharged from like eating disorder services in 2018, and it was from there which I really started like getting involved with kind of any kind of activism, because I was especially like disgusted at the way that I was treated, but especially like just mental health services in general. So the second photo is like one of my Instagram posts, because I started off doing a lot of stuff around the way in which like young people and anyone going through eating disorder services are treated. So that was kind of like my first kind of step into wanting to like make bigger change. And kind of my eating disorder like very much like stays with me like throughout my activism, because I was always kind of told like throughout recovery, when you get better, like the world will be like you'll have such a good time and like the world will be a great place. And then I found out about like climate change and everything, and I was like, whoa, I don't want anyone to have to like go through anything like I did, and I just want to make the world a better place. So yeah, then I got really into running, and I did a lot of stuff like litter picks and like painting random like church halls and like volunteering with cool runnings, which was great. So that was kind of like dipping my toes into kind of doing some kind of like pro-environmental behaviour, I guess. Fridays for Future, I got involved with that from 2019 onwards, and that was a picture from the climate strike. Yeah, I think it was like around September 2019. Then COVID hit, and that thing happened. And I went home for a little bit, and during the Black Lives Matter movement, I and another like couple of people made like a Black Lives Matter group, and I organised my first protest, which was great. And we had about like 300, 400 people from like my tiny little town kind of all gathering together. And that's where I met Peter there, who's involved with XR. And yeah, that story will continue on the next slide. And yeah, doing like litter picks and just like local things like that. And throughout this kind of time, well, I'm a history student, but at this kind of time I was just learning about like climate change and reading and like kind of learning about what's going on. Then yeah, I joined Extinction Rebellion after reading like a lot of books and just learning about the climate crisis. And I did a bit of drumming for a bit, and there's Peter again in the background. And I did some like random fun actions. That was like a Barclays bank clean up with my mum. The Barclays bank were actually quite happy that we were cleaning up the outside of their bank. But yeah, that was a good way to like kind of like draw attention to things. And I probably had about like 100 conversations within like a couple of hours like on that day. Then Be the Change at the University of Exeter. I've been pretty involved with them. That was a red meat debate in 2021, which was great. We only lost by like a tiny margin, so not bad. That was about like banning red meat on campus. Dressing up as a bee throughout Freshers Week to promote Be the Change Society, the community garden, and society training. This is like the evolution. Then some more like flashy stuff. I went to COP26, which was very like informative, like 2 weeks of my life. I went for the first week like as an activist with Green New Deal Rising, and then the second week I went like as a delegate for the university. This was an action from Green New Deal Rising. This is like their launch action. We dropped like these massive banners in Westminster Hall. There's a policewoman looking not very happy there, but that was like another like really something that will stay with me. That kind of like being in a community and doing something together, which was really good. I've been part of the Stop Camber and Stop Rosebank campaign. This is a picture of me and Jeremy there. He doesn't look very happy because he's thinking about fossil fuels. But yeah, that was from like September. So I've done kind of like quite a bit of work just like lobbying like individual MPs as part of like a big collective organisation. This was I was invited to speak at this very flashy event with lots of like important people in Rome, which was great. Yeah, that's just a quote from Greta Thunberg about being a young person and just feeling frustrated. And I feel like that kind of like all the time when I go to these like flashy events, and you have to kind of like keep your cool, but really you just want to kind of like shout and yeah. And this was from December. I was on a panel called The Future of the Planet, which was very joyous. And yeah, so I've kind of had a lot of like experiences doing very like grassroots stuff, but also I've been like very like privileged and honoured to be asked to speak at these like flashy events. But if I had to pick one, it'd be 100% be like cleaning up Barclays Bank with my mum. Like it's a great time. So yeah, now on to the Repair Cafe. Yes, so after COP26, it was like the penultimate day of being there. I was so frustrated just with like the lack of action, and I was just so like disempowered by what was going on in those really fancy boardrooms. Like the last day I called up my mum and I said, "Mum, we've got to do something like real, like all of this is just words, let's do something real. So we started up the Repair Cafe in Blandford, which is my hometown. And yeah, like since then we've kind of been doing it every month, and we've done stuff like free haircuts, working with the food bank, doing like CV workshops, and kind of creating like a real big community around, you know, sustainability and just like community mutual aid, which has been great. And then I'm going to play you this clip because this leads nicely onto the theme of positive tipping points. I'm going to play it. I hope it's loud. If not, there are subtitles. Ooh.
Hi, yeah, I'm a Labour Party member and I'm a part of the Green New Deal Rising. I'm back in the Green New Deal bill. Here, I'm a Labour Party member and I'm also part of Green New Deal Rising. Are you going to be committing to the 85 million we need? Will you commit to the impact? We just tried to talk to Keir Starmer about backing the Green New Deal bill and the 85 million we need to transition to a green economy. He literally completely ignored me. So is this how he treats his Labour members? Is this how he treats the young people, the future generations? Not committing to the Green New Deal? Yeah, wow.
Wow, indeed. I haven't watched that. I don't choose to watch that.
Yeah.
Oh, no, okay. Yeah, so that was September 2021 in Brighton. I went to like the Labour Party conference with the Green New Deal group because we were, you know, specifically targeting like Labour politicians to kind of commit to more radical green policies. As a result of that, it got quite a bit of like media attention because of just like how bad it was. And a lot of people have like photoshopped this picture and making me look really tall and him really short, which is quite funny. So yeah, that was like a real like big moment, and like kind of dealing with like the social media, like going like popping off and stuff. But as a result of that, later, like a few days later in his speech, he mentioned, well, he said that Labour were committing to a Green New Deal, and a couple of sources have attributed that to like Green New Deal Rising and like that action, which is good. But yeah, it just kind of goes to show that these big movements, like putting pressure on politicians and kind of like changing the norm and changing like what needs to be done. And then this photo is from Labour Conference 2022, and they actually invited me to speak, which was quite nice. So yeah, and that leads me on to the idea of like a positive tipping point. So I've just read about this in my free time. It's not going to be perfect, but tipping points and everything is something that I've read into more as a result of going to the Tipping Points conference a few months ago. And yeah, this is just my very like basic understanding of it. It's probably not perfect, but it's all good. So the idea of a tipping point has kind of been used a lot to analyze like climate and ecological tipping points. You know, it's kind of like 5 key tipping points, which we're kind of reaching. But the idea of like a social tipping point and how we can use this idea of changing systems in a positive way is quite like a kind of new idea. And I think it's really important to kind of consider this in the context of activism, and for this presentation, like student activism. So a tipping point is where like small interventions lead to large and long-term consequences for the evolution of a complex system, significantly altering its mode of operation. And Tim Lenton obviously is all very big in that area. So yeah, basically it's this idea that like a small nudge can lead to rapid social change, and this can be applied to accelerating action on climate change. I'm really interested in it from like the social science perspective of how we can kind of like identify these smaller trigger points and like push them and enable them to make these bigger changes. So yeah, I've got my notes here and actually use these, which is nice. Positive tipping points are really important because they can kind of empower us to be able to make change in the climate emergency, and they can offer us like a lot of hope in like our activism and being able to continue that and transform to more like social and climate justice perspectives. And yeah, so the framework for identifying positive tipping points has been like broken up into 3 parts. So there's like the enabling conditions for a positive tipping point, which can include targeting smaller populations, altering a social network structure, providing relevant information, reducing prices, improving performance, desirability and accessibility. So some scholars have looked at it with the example of like electric cars and how by making, although there's like the problems with electric cars and like how the minerals are found and everything, that can be like an example of how we can like tip a system towards like a more pro-environmental behavior. And for a tipping point to occur, there needs to be ongoing like reinforcing feedbacks, which can make it like a desirable thing to be doing. And then at the end, by like triggering the positive tipping point, that can be fostered through like social, technological and ecological innovations. And that can be things like behavioral nudges and public investment. So in the next two examples, I'm going to apply the positive tipping points model to the complex system of the University of Exeter. So first off is a bit more of a historic example of student activism leading to like a big change, which is the Boycott Barclays campaign, which was part of the anti-apartheid movement. Big British companies, including Barclays, had subsidiaries in South Africa. And from the late 1960s, the anti-apartheid movement campaigned to persuade them to pull out. And expose the ways that they supported apartheid and asked organisations and individuals to sell their shares. Now, students were like very much at the forefront of this campaign because they pushed like their universities and their campuses to close their accounts with Barclays and their branches on campus, and like loads of customers basically closed their accounts with Barclays. Because of all of this, in 1986, Barclays withdrew from South Africa, and it was one of like the key turning points in making like apartheid like unacceptable. Yeah. And then, so in 1984, the Exeter Students Guild boycotted Barclays, and these are like the meeting notes from that decision to boycott them. So yeah, like there's a real like history amongst student movements, not just obviously climate, but just social justice campaigns, including at the University of Exeter. So yeah, there were like a lot of amendments to it, but basically a lot of universities, like a domino effect, boycotted Barclays, and yeah. So now to a present case study of the food campaigns on campus. I've been involved with the Plant-Based Universities campaign for like 2 years, and now like the £2 meal campaign. And very much like the cost of living crisis and climate crisis are very much like intersected to make like the conditions at the university like a place where these like radical changes can be made in terms of like food provision on campus. So yes, I want to use like the social tipping points model to look at like the change that we made. Sorry, this looks like quite chaotic, but in my head it makes sense. So basically like those three kind of the stages of like the tipping point can very much like be applied to the £2 meal campaign. Because basically what we were trying to do with that campaign was push the university not only to offer like an affordable option on campus, but also like a sustainable option. And all of our demands are very much focused on the affordability and the sustainability of all the food that would be served in the outlet. So yeah, at the very start of the campaign, we very much worked in coalition with the Plant-Based Unis campaign, basically focusing on like the environmental and social benefits of plant-based diets for the climate and for people. So we had the enabling conditions very much of triggering this tipping point at the moment by targeting like the population of the students rather than like the whole university, making sure that the food was good, and providing loads of information to students in the form of like media, like student radio, student newspapers, altering kind of like the social structure in the way that we did it, because we had me like in the system and like the students outside of it very much like pushing at the same time. Obviously reducing the price to make like a plant-based option appealing to students, and making it desirable and accessible by having it in like a key point in the university. The second point of like triggering a positive tipping point is having like the reinforcing feedbacks of the thing you're trying to change. I believe we've reached like this social contagion period, because we have like students using it pretty much every day. I think it's like, how many meals are we selling? Like 800? I don't know, it's like, it's a lot. I'm just asking the people that are involved with the campaign. But we are selling like a lot of meals every day, showing that like a plant-based option can be really appealing to students when it's like low cost and accessible. We're providing a lot of information to students, and the place is achieving economies of scale with more and more students using it. And lastly, I think we're very much at like a stage where people are open to like new ideas, like especially at the university level, like seeing how successful that this outlet is because of like the massive appeal it has to students, and you know, massive queues every day. We're very much working in coalition with like lots of different student groups and staff at the university to make this continue. The university are like heavily subsidising it, so there's a lot of like investment going into it. And yeah, it's slowly like funneling through to other universities and like other students external to Exeter about like offering like a low cost like plant-based food option on their campuses. And we hope that with things like me being elected as guild president, we can kind of hopefully continue to push the systems towards hopefully this tipping point where the university is offering food for students rather than just for profit. The campaign is very much like empowered students to continue to take actions, and it's important to consider how like the different agents, being like the students and the university, can work together to create this system-wide tipping point. This very big graph, which I can share with you, is the result of a series of seminars that I was involved with a little bit last year, which is about like identifying positive tipping points. The first one was from a seminar based on student activism and kind of what the tipping point structure can kind of look like at the university, with the conditions for change being student representation and decisions and removing the threat of like disciplinary action, increasing acceptability of climate activism and greater collaboration, and then a potential trigger being actions with mass appeal and change in senior staff roles. So yeah, that's quite like a nice way of like mapping out like what we're doing in a more like theoretical basis. So this is a very lovely graph as well from the Green Futures Network about positive tipping points in action. I think like in terms of like the food systems at the University of Exeter and in general like climate decision making and like accountability in making those kind of decisions, we're probably kind of at this kind of stage, I'd say, because we kind of have the right conditions for change at the moment, which is limiting resistance to new ideas, especially with the cost of living crisis. The university have been like a lot more open to change, but we are kind of like pushing towards this stage. But the main drawback, obviously, of university activism is the fact that students are limited by like 3 to 4 years often in kind of like making change. So it's kind of like pushing that ball is very hard when there's this constant like change in students. But yeah, we need to get to this point. So yeah. The Shell Out campaign is very much like a continuation of the momentum of the £2 meal campaign, in the sense that now students have kind of seen what can be achieved, like kind of together and like collaborating and pushing the university to make decisions for the sake of the planet and for the sake of the students, and how that can be achieved. So yeah, like a barrier to activism is obviously like at the university only having a certain amount of time and like being able to continue doing it with your studies. But the momentum of the £2 meal campaign, like the turnaround of that, has given like the student movement like a lot of power to kind of like continue pushing the system. But it's kind of like, how do you flip it over the edge? And I think, you know, collaboration with staff where possible and making these ideas like more acceptable is incredibly important. So yeah, what the £2 meal campaign has done for like a niche of students and staff is to empower them to make that social change, which is simultaneously a climate action, as all the food is obviously plant-based, as well as being something to tackle the cost of living crisis for students. So yeah, both campaigns are obviously linked by wanting to challenge the university in both of the climate and cost of living crises. And you can scan that if you want to take you to our website. But yeah, sorry, I absolutely flew through that. Have you got any questions at this point? Sorry, I absolutely flew through that. Yeah.
You might go into it soon, but are you going to talk about what the Shell Out campaign is about? Or...
I can do that.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so it wasn't factored in, but the Shell Out campaign is basically a coalition of students, staff and climate justice groups and activists kind of raising the alarm about being in such like a tight-knit partnership with Shell. The university has been in an ongoing relationship and partnership with Shell based on kind of wanting to, I guess, push Shell on some kind of tipping point and making the continual extraction of fossil fuels unacceptable. But we, as like a collective, very much believe that working with Shell isn't going to change them, and actually we just need to be working to break ties with them and make, you know, a really prestigious university in kind of climate science working with a very neo-colonialist organization like Shell, like unacceptable, because fundamentally Shell are investing like millions and billions into new oil and gas, and kind of like the concept that Exeter will be able to like shift them is quite like, it would be a nice idea, but it's just not really very realistic. And there's kind of ulterior motives in terms of like the greenwashing which is going on. So yeah, we're kind of very much forcing like greater conversation, like collaboration in terms of like how partnerships are made with the university, because we fundamentally believe that like we are key stakeholders, and there's a lot of posters around the university currently about students as collaborators. And if that's going to happen, that will have to be at the expense of collaborating with external organisations. So the big kind of way up for the university, I guess, is, are they prioritising their external partnerships or their internal ones with their students? At the moment, it's the latter. So yeah, it's kind of like this way up between which one do they want to prioritise, and we strongly believe that it should be the students, because we're the ones most impacted by the climate crisis, essentially. Not gonna lie, I didn't even got on time for taking away and questions. So the takeaways, we have a picture. We can all play a part in positive social tipping points, as shown with the £2 meal campaign. Like, we couldn't have achieved that without student activists, but also people in the university who are willing to kind of listen to us and not, you know, exclude us, as has been done at like other universities when you try and campaign. And it's worked before, as shown with like the Boycott Barclays action. That was like a lot of students kind of drawing attention to something which was fundamentally wrong. So we can do it again, and collaboration is key. So I whizzed through that, but if you've got any questions, please just let me know.
Thanks very much, Emma. Just to say, yeah, for people in the room, feel free to pop your hands up to ask questions. For people online, feel free to type questions into the chat and I'll read them out, or put a hand up, and you're welcome to unmute and ask questions then. Please be aware this meeting is being recorded though, so if you wouldn't like to be on the recording, do just type it into the chat if you have a question. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you for your talk, Emma. That was fantastic, and fantastic work also. I'm wondering, with it's super interesting to see it all through, like you're showing us concrete examples of positive tipping points. And I'm wondering if you can tell us a bit about, like, for example, for the £2 meal campaign, how many students were involved in that? And do you think that, like, how big a part did the number of students involved, play a role into creating a tipping point? Do you have a feel for that kind of thing?
Yeah, no, so I think with the £2 meal campaign, it was very much like different layers, I guess, of involvement, which is also like integral to making that shift. There was about, it started off as a very small group of about like 10 of us with this idea and just going out and speaking to students. We had eventually, I think we're on like our petition, like it's still getting signatures randomly, but our petition's on about 1,500 students kind of saying we want this. So that was like really key to kind of just speaking to loads of students. But I was speaking to one of my friends the other day about this idea of the, like the 3.5% figure of a population and how that can shift things. And we were thinking, and I've been thinking like those that apply to the university in terms of like a tipping point. But I think it's very much like a word of mouth thing. And the more and more students have used it, the more the university has been like, okay, let's like continue it. But yeah, we couldn't have done it without like all of those students kind of like signing the petition and just knowing about it, because there's like much greater accountability. But yeah, like our campaign group at the moment, we've got about like 35 people kind of, involved like behind the scenes with doing stuff.
What's the 3.5% figure?
That was, who was it, Erica
Chenoweth.
Chenoweth. It was a figure which I think it's like she analysed like 230 odd like revolutions and like social movements. I think it was especially in relation to like a nation, and like that's like the percentage of people involved in like a revolution which kind of like made a big change, because Extinction Rebellion used to use that quite a lot. I don't know if they still do, but they always kind of use that as like a base of like, this is how many people need to like go on a march to kind of make a big difference.
Yeah, because I read a study by Santola about, they were trying to like looking at different movements and trying to figure out like what's that percentage of people that are needed to tip the system. And they were saying that there was like a range of values that kind of depends on the properties of each system, basically. And so actually, have you considered like, it's going to sound really academic, but like writing this up?
Good to, yeah, good to.
Because yeah, I mean, it's probably, actually it'd be really interesting to see that there's probably, I mean, there are other universities that are going through similar movements, and maybe there are commonalities between them.
Yeah, no, definitely, because we've had quite a lot of interest. We've had about 4 or 5 like different project groups or individuals wanting to do like their I'd like dissertational projects on the £2 meal campaign. So yeah, there's definitely some like cool stuff coming out of it as well. And I think it's just something actually kind of like concrete coming out of student activism is always really positive, and that's why we've got momentum, and we want to like continue sharing like a success story, because we don't get to like talk about successes enough.
Yeah, it can almost be a blueprint for other unis.
Thanks, Emma, that's great. I'm curious to know, so in psychology we talk a lot about gain and lost focus and framing. So it's clear with the £2 meal, there's a lot in it for the students, right? It's healthy, it's tasty, it's cheap, it's sustainable. So do you think that's a much easier sell in terms of to the students than the shell out campaign, where there's no immediate tangible benefits for the individuals, and in fact there's a lot of potential loss financially to the university?
No, yeah, 100%. And with the £2 meal thing, it's kind of given a foundation for like, look, we can make change. And this is what happens when students do a campaign. Like, it's not just going to be shouting into like an echo chamber. And I think very much like the university have seen, like, we can do it when we put our heads together. Obviously, like, yeah, with the shell campaign, there's no immediate tangible benefit. So that's why kind of like the education process is going to be a lot more formative for like gaining momentum about it. So we're very much focusing on more things like, workshops, doing like regular like outreach stalls and stuff to talk about why we're doing this campaign, and talking about like kind of like the history and ongoing stuff that Shelley's doing, to kind of show that yes, okay, it's not like a tangible benefit to kind of sign this petition or go to this protest to you, but it kind of very much is in like on like the long, like the perspective of the climate crisis, like ongoing and future. So yeah, it is a harder sell, but we're very much, we know that the climate crisis is happening now, and if students want to do something about it, this is like a good way to get involved on campus. And, you know, not every campaign is going to have that immediate benefit, because if it did, we would be in a lot better position than we are now, right?
But is there an argument for going for those types of lower hanging fruit first and putting all your energy into areas where there's a lot of positives? It's like a win-win, right? And also for the university, I mean, I don't know if the university's happy with your £2 meals or whether there's been pushback from the other caterers, but
yeah, no, and I think, like, you know, we've done this campaign now, and it is a lot of like kind of like similar circles and like networks that are getting involved with this campaign now. But we're going to kind of continue. I'm currently like spinning a couple of plates, and I want to continue doing like the tangible stuff for students now, as well as the other bits, as well as like the Shell Out campaign. But yeah, like it is all interconnected, right? But communicating that is a little bit more difficult in kind of like the campaign sense, because it's hard to get across kind of like the nuance of why Shell is so bad when it's just like get the Shell out. It's kind of like why, and that's what we're trying to like focus on a lot.
Can you elaborate a bit actually on the reaction from the uni with the £2 campaign?
Yeah. I mean, that's all good. Yeah, I mean, like,
It's going to be on the YouTube channel.
that's all fine. I mean, the university are subsidising it. They said they've been choosing between 40,000 and 100,000 a year, but that works out as about like £4 per student per head. And considering the amount that like the university spends per student on marketing, it's something, what is it? It's something like it's definitely over £200 a year. It's even more than that on marketing. And compared to the amount they spend on like wellbeing and stuff, which is like £30 per student per head. This is national figures. It's like a very small intervention, which is helping students' wellbeing and probably attainment, because if you can get like a low cost option on campus, great. But yeah, like the university, obviously they don't want to have to continue putting money into it, but they're just going to get to a point where, again, it's going to be students are expecting it, and when they don't do it, there will be protests or there will be like a lot of backlash. So yeah, I think with the £2 meal thing, like although the university obviously is costing them money, I think in the long run they are going to see the benefits and students will be expecting it. So we're very much like, I guess, shifting like the Overton window of like what needs to be offered on campus for students, because in like a lot of European universities, like they have their like menses and they have like affordable food on campus. So it's kind of like bringing that into students' like mindsets here.
Oh no, after you.
Okay. Very quick question on sort of almost personal tipping points. It's sort of, you went through your history as an activist, and then at some point it just suddenly went to, you were in Rome and you were speaking at the Labour conference. When you look back on that journey, do you think there was a moment where you suddenly sort of had entered the big leagues, as it were?
What, of climate activism?
Yeah, or in general.
Yeah,
having a voice.
Yeah, I mean, like it has been like when I was putting that together over the last couple of days, I was kind of like, whoa, there's been a lot that's happened. But I've been very kind of like fortunate to kind of just fall into different things. And like when I was a lot younger, I kind of spent about like 4 years being so introspective because of like recovering from like mental health stuff. I think that gave me a lot of time, and then I came out and I was all of a sudden had like a voice in like everything, and I just kind of like went for it. So yeah, I've just had a lot of really cool opportunities and just taken them. But yeah, I thought you were gonna ask like, where's my tipping point? No. One of you, yeah. Yes.
Well, following on from that, thank you very much for all the work that you are doing and have done. It is both impressive and humbling. About the tipping points, which I suppose what we're meant to be here today about, I think it's a really important metaphor and to be useful. Can you put the tipping point slide? I want to point out something. Yeah, the one with the little tipping 90.
This one?
Yeah. So you're talking about kind of driving the ball up the peak before it then falls down somewhere else. And another way of doing it, of course, is by deforming that landscape, right? Making the peak a little less steep. So in the food project or campaign, it was almost as if getting the university to change the landscape. And when you're thinking about it like that, I guess it's much more kind of old-fashioned activism and politics, where you basically exert sufficient pressure that they have to do the right thing, right? It's just in their interest to facilitate the change. But then what is really interesting about the tipping points metaphor is when it is changed, and as you just said, there's kind of like a ratchet effect. Because when now university wants to remove that, or you remove that £2 meal, it's all going to kick off.
Yeah.
Which is why, regards to maybe other campaigns on the climate ecological crisis, there were a whole series of kind of initial sort of wedges that we drove in with the climate and ecological emergencies being declared, and this university is one. And let's be honest, it didn't know what it was doing, but there is now the expectation that it is going to do something by a certain date. And if you follow that through, that might be a really important framing for getting to university to reflect on relationships. Does it want, what kind of organisations does it want to support or work with, given that it's gone and made some really quite bold commitments. So there's another little kind of ratchet. You can't let it row back on some of its previous commitments, even though it probably does want to.
Yeah, no, 100%. And yeah, as well as like obviously our individual campaigns, like something which is very promising is the fact that we've got a lot more voice in terms of like with the Student Guild and the Student Union in Cornwall. We've got a lot more individuals and students like running very much on like a climate justice manifesto. So that's really good in terms of getting like that representation. So it kind of does set that precedent and like norming it, because when I came into the role like just under a year ago as like a climate activist, I mean, I still get the question every day at work of like, is this you as a climate activist, or is this you as Vice President Liberation and Equality? And the two things very much separated, but I'm doing my very best to like bring them together, because I think that's really important to have like, you know, it can't just be the role of like individuals like climate activists, climate scientists to do the climate stuff. It needs to be everyone like shifting it, so it's everyone's kind of responsibility. Sorry, that was just an add-on to your very good point.
Question from the chat on the line.
Yes.
Could you please explain further how the Stop Cambo campaign led to a success story / tipping point of Shell pulling out of the Cambo oil field? Thank you for an amazing and wholesome presentation.
Thank you. Yeah, so the Stop Cambo campaign is basically based on like looking at what the UK government or governments across the world are doing in terms of licensing new oil and gas fields. With the Stop Cambo campaign, we pretty much worked to lobby like MPs and like organisations to kind of focus on this one particular new fossil fuel project, and we basically I'd say embarrassed the government to the extent that it's been like put on pause, and that was kind of as a result of a lot of like, again, like grassroots activism, but also getting involved with like the political system at the top. So yeah, that was very much like again, this like top down, bottom up, and using kind of like the whole network to kind of put pressure and get the government to like put the brakes on the Cambo oil field. Yeah.
I was in catered accommodation on campus my first year. I was just wondering if you'd be interested in, or if you know anything about the sustainability like aspect of how they cater for students there, because I'm actually not aware. I don't know if they do anything, or if it is, you know, at the forefront of their kind of like what they're trying to do to improve. But yeah, it'd be quite interesting to hear.
Yeah, no, I mean, I spent a lot of time looking at kind of like catered tours, and that was actually one of the reasons that we did the £2 meal campaign as well, because we know that people in catered accommodation, like, it's really difficult to get. They don't get lunch, I think.
Yeah, we
don't get lunch. So it's kind of like you have to. There's no kitchen, and it's kind of like really unsustainable model for students. But yeah, like I've kind of sat on a lot of meetings in the university about like the like sustainability and like affordability of food on campus. It's still something we're like very much pushing because it's not great. Like there are vegan options, but again, it's not like normalized in the sense that having like like meat as like the main focus is. I mean, we have made small changes, I'd say. Things like putting like the plant-based option like first on the menu and having like a greater variety of things. But it's something, yeah, we're still very much pushing. Especially like the plant-based unis campaign is, yeah, still kind of like going on in the background. But yeah, no, it's a very good point.
I'll just add to that, the catering team removed ruminant meat from all outlets other than the Ram bar, because that's the burger bar that everyone gets for a burger. And that I asked them why they hadn't removed it in catered halls, and they said because there's no kitchen, students would be unable to make ruminant meat meals for themselves. And if people have certain religious faith, which means they can't eat some meats, then all they can eat is chicken and fish. I'm not aware of any evidence that that's a big problem, but that's obviously perceived as a lack of choice for students.
Yeah.
But I think it would be interesting to see if that is a problem, right? Would students mind if there were restricted meat options in catered halls? I don't know. I mean, I suspect there's a bit of an issue with it huge increase in international students as well, because there's cultural differences in what foods people eat. So
and like the food like thing and like the plant-based food thing is obviously such like a huge like issue, and it brings in so many different like problems and like traditions, and how do we ensure like farmers can have a just transition to like plant-based food production as opposed to like livestock. So yeah, it's like a huge thing, and I don't think, you know, the UK government are going to go near it. So it's kind of for you know, us to kind of make like small changes where we can, but also like being like, yeah, culturally sensitive, but also realizing that, you know, plant-based food and that shift will be like vital in the face of a climate emergency. Any other cues? Yes.
This is I'm sort of speaking off the top of my head here, so sorry if this is a bit incoherent, but there's a big issue, I think, within this whole framework that we're talking about today, which is that probably something like 80 to 90% of students don't actually care about any of this, and basically the people that influence it, the people that influence these decisions are those people that care enough to show up, basically. So obviously there's a kind of democratic issue, I guess, with like who's making these decisions, who is it that decides that we're having a plant-based transition. Obviously we all know that's the right thing to do, but at the same time it's kind of like there's a bit of an opportunity in the sense that unless you're doing something really, really unpopular, then, you know, and again, I don't know how much power you have as guild president going into next year to like influence what the uni does in terms of like, do we have meat and dairy on campus? You know, can you change that? Because if you can change that, a lot of people will just kind of go with the flow, just be like, oh yeah, there's only plant-based food on this campus, and you know, does that sort of make sense?
So do I have that much power to kind of
what I'm saying is yeah, and again, sorry if I'm not connecting the threads very well, but like we shouldn't hold back unless what we're proposing in terms of positive tipping points is really, really controversial. Like, you know, I don't know, taking away students' ability to smoke on campus or something like that, you know, or to drink alcohol on campus, you know, there's arguments for that, right? But basically what I'm saying is we kind of need to just go for these things because they will happen, and because the people that care enough to show up are there, and obviously we will support you in every way that we can to do this. So that's sort of what I'm saying. So we have massive power, and yeah.
I think like a lot of students do care, to be honest. Like in this job, I chose this job because I didn't want to go just into climate stuff straight away. I want to like be able to speak to all students and like represent everyone on all issues. And I've definitely seen like over this year, like kind of being in completely different spaces to what I would potentially choose to be in, and talking about things like the £2 meal deal, and like talking about like the climate crisis and everything. Like a lot of people do care. I'd say like a lot of students do, but it's kind of like, especially at the university, with kind of like just how complicated the systems and the structures and everything are, and being such a huge university, talking like in the university context, people just do feel like disempowered to make that change. So I would say like, you know, a lot of students like do care even if they're not taking action, and it's very much like that herd mentality, I'd say. So that's why, you know, that campaign was great to kind of bring these issues to students' minds. And like when I speak to people about how we got that £2 outlet, like on my campaign, just saying like, you know, this was the result of a campaign, and they're like, oh really, that's cool. So it kind of, yeah, it makes it cool, I guess. makes climate activism cool, but yeah, again, we shouldn't hold back with making the changes, but by like spreading ourselves and having everyone kind of like relatively interested, it just does make it a lot easier to tip it, even if it's just signing a petition. But yeah, no, you are right in the sense that like some people obviously do just want to come to uni, but I have seen definitely like a big shift this year, and a lot bigger than kind of what I anticipated, and that's why I wanted to run again. Yeah. Yes.
Something I find interesting about this kind of idea around positive tipping points, and something I've experienced a lot in sort of climate activism myself, is not knowing when a tipping point is going to come at all, and the psychological difficulty of constantly fighting and trying to do these things and trying to achieve some form of change without being able to see when the top of the hill is and when you're going to roll into the next state or whatever. And I think the £2 meal deal is just a wonderful example of like a real success story. And it's really, really wonderful to hear about it, especially. But yeah, I wonder what you think about like when you can actually see when this change is going to be achieved.
Yeah, I don't know, I don't think you can see it really, can you? I think it's gonna, you know, things will happen when they do, and that's why the system is so complicated. But I think definitely being able to kind of like use this as some kind of model to kind of like hold on to and like consider about like how it worked and how we can kind of like identify those like triggers and stuff, and like further those like enablers of like a campaign is really helpful. And also I didn't go into this campaign being like, I want to create a positive tipping point. Like, it was just something that like we did the campaign, then I found out about this and I was like, oh, that's cool. How can I look at this in this way? Because also like the nature of activism is it's so like fast paced and like sporadic and up and down. Being able to kind of like look at something and consider it, just have it like, you know, in the back of your mind, is kind of helpful, and it is that empowering thing when everything seems like very confusing about how we're gonna do anything and if we should do anything and why we should do anything. Being able to look at like a model is just really nice. You know, but yeah, obviously I didn't go into the campaign being like we want to create a system in flux. We just wanted to create a bit of chaos, I guess. Yeah.
I guess that system reminds you that you can't see over the top of the hill until you're basically there or already past it. But and that's expected. So maybe that makes us feel better as people. I really identify with what you're saying.
I put my hand up. I'm always getting told off a lot. And you kind of said what I was going to say. It feels like a Sisyphean task, constantly rolling the ball up. And the minute you stop, it goes all the way back down to the bottom. All these other people are pushing it down. So maybe a really important thing about this model is that there actually is. It might be fictional. Right? It might be just a plateau. But if you get the sense of, you know, sometimes when I'm giving talks now, you phrase, look, we're going to win. We are going to win. There will be a just transition. The only issue is when, right? So how quickly can we get there? So this sense of inevitability. So you're not just doomed to keep pushing against this force, but you can actually get to some point, and then the tipping point is a sort of, it's not the victory point, but that's when you can see you're going to get that critical mass and things should hopefully get easier.
Yeah, no, 100%. Yeah.
That wasn't a question either.
No.
Do you agree?
Yeah, 100%. And that's why, like, you know, I wake up every morning and I'm like, what can we do next and what needs doing? You've got to have that kind of hope, and doing stuff together just makes that a whole lot easier. Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
With reaching these positive tipping points, how do you deal with and address burnout? And what can university management / leadership do in practice to support burnout of students and staff activists?
Yeah, no, very good question. I think like burnout amongst like climate activists and kind of just getting absolutely exhausted to the point of not wanting to do anything is a big problem. And it's kind of preventing against that by doing stuff together, taking time out, and all of that. I think in terms of, yeah, like the university, obviously a lot of the stuff we're doing fundamentally goes against like some of the objectives of the uni in terms of, you know, like the shell campaign and everything. But I think the university can definitely, yeah, see us as collaborators and listen and have more of like an open door to these big issues, rather than us having to get to a point of like burning out before we kind of like can achieve our campaign aims. There's a big problem around like a lot of the work on campus, like sustainability work, which the university likes, being unpaid. Obviously that's a huge one. I've done like a couple of internships with the uni, but again, like a lot of those have been more like marketing kind of things. But yeah, like kind of introducing more like paid roles for students, like across the board, not just in obviously climate and environment stuff, but smaller scale like projects. Because there's like students who go to prep at the end of the day and they pick up the leftover food and they take it to one of like the homeless centres in Exeter. I think that should be like paid work that the university should be paying students to do, not a volunteer thing. But yeah, unfortunately, like a lot of the stuff at uni that students are involved with is unpaid work. So I think, yeah, that would be a massive initiative, and obviously some investment, again, which is something I'm working on at the moment in like the wellbeing services, particularly on like, you know, because a lot of this work does come with like a lot of anxiety and stress. So yeah, improving those wellbeing services would be great. But yeah, obviously that's not just like a uni specific thing, there's like a mental health crisis, right? But anything that uni can do would be very greatly received.
It takes time to go through a couple of the comments that we had from the chat during the course of the talk. Just at the start, you asked about things that made people, you know, feel positive about the future. We've had one response, the rate of growth of renewable energy, and one response which was young people like you. Tim has also said that you should join the Green Party, but he has received support from the chat as well. And then we've had, there's been some interesting discussion about sort of the scientific literature underlying tipping points. That'll be available on the chat transcript down the line. And then we just had some comments about how back in the 70s and 80s, apparently food was cheap and wholesome in canteens, and that's, you know, something that potentially people can sympathize with. I'm not sure if that's a uniform experience. And then we've got, oh yes, a question about the £2 meal deal campaign. What kind of assumptions did you make, and how did you navigate them against the backdrop of real life scenario, or the real life scenario?
I guess like obviously being inspired by the other student campaigns is definitely, like, as a history student as well, who's done a lot on like social movements and stuff. I think that's why I come into kind of like the climate space, like knowing we can make change, and I kind of go in with it with that mindset. And so yeah, definitely like inspired by other student campaigns and felt like we can make change. I think also like my role sitting in like the cost of living like working group at the uni, and kind of actually knowing that there's an opportunity here to kind of make a big change, and have kind of like those open minds on like the leadership level. Definitely like I knew that we could do something, and it just needed like a big push. Yeah.
And a quick comment on your question about the 80% of people not caring. Could you clarify what that exactly might mean?
Well, it's a normal distribution curve, right? So like most people, you've got people on this end of the distribution who are like super political, like in a society, where they're the people that show up to every meeting, you know, this is their life, this is their raison d'etre. Some people aren't political at all, they're not engaged, and then you've got most people in the middle who are sort of, you know, they might know a little bit, but you know, it's not a big part of their life. So it's just like most students here, and to be honest, I know this is just anecdote, right? But you just listen to the kind of conversations that happen, you know, in the RAM, and you know, it's like people aren't. There's a lot of people you can push them really hard, and they're not going to get into anything like this. but they would still be in favour of the changes that we can bring about by getting these. So when I say 80 people don't care, I don't mean, when I say 80% of people don't care, I don't mean like, oh, we're the 10 or 20% who are good and you know, we're above them. I'm just saying, like, we have a responsibility as people, as I say, who have shown up at this group today. Obviously, this is a very incomplete picture, right? There's lots and lots of other people. We have a responsibility to like make these changes happen, and we can, and we don't need everyone. We just need a committed group of people who are organised, basically. That's sort of what I was saying. So I wasn't making any judgment about what people should or shouldn't believe, or how interested people should or shouldn't be.
Okay. Yeah, Tim just says that surveys suggest that at least 75% of the population at least care about or are concerned about climate change. So just wondering if you're referring specifically to something like, you know, people who would do something actively, or
maybe a different way of putting it is care enough to be involved, or have the ability to be involved. I guess that's better than just flatly saying.
Okay.
Yeah.
And that's just from sort of an expected distribution of these sorts of things. Okay, thanks. James, yeah.
I've got a question then, following on from that. Is producing change not so much about mobilising the 80% or over a majority, but ensuring that there is a sufficiently small number of people not stopping you? So it's not so much encouraging people to produce a change, but getting the barriers to change out of the way, which could be a relatively small number of people, especially if you think about power hierarchies and things.
Yeah, 100%. Like, the university is a pyramid at the end of the day, and like, these people do make the big decisions, and to kind of being able to either shift them out of the way or move them to our side or whatever, and like challenging that hierarchy all the time is something, yeah, which is really important. And definitely, like, going into this role next year, like, supposedly I'm kind of in all of those like big meetings and stuff, but I know that fundamentally the power does come from the students at the bottom. But yeah, no, that's
In terms of the people in those meetings, do you get a sense that they are quite objective and listen to the evidence, or do you think there's a lot of bias where people will defend their own personal positions? And
I think like yeah, the uni is very like data driven, like as they all are. So yeah, I think we just got to like keep on doing the good stuff and showing that like a lot of people want that. I think yeah, that's probably the most important thing that we can do. Yeah.
So I've noticed we have overshot the 3 p.m. end time. Really engaging discussion. For those online, thank you very much for bearing with us. Thank you for the interesting contributions. Hope you enjoyed. We will be having another seminar next week that will be entirely online. That's Audrey Wagner from the Nature-Based Solutions Initiative, talking about nature-based solutions and the kinds of things we can do ecologically using nature to solve the climate crisis. Please do join us for that if you can. For those in the room, we do have some time for informal chats to continue on from this. I'm sure there's lots to be said. And we do obviously have refreshments. So yes, and for those online, thank you for joining us. The recording will be available on the YouTube channel for the GSI, and we'll send around a link once that's uploaded as well. Thanks again, Emma. Really enjoyed that.